Hi, my name is Laura. I've been doing a series on my unicornate uterus covering my miscarriage and diagnosis, my ectopic with the rudimentary horn, my rainbow pregnancy and labour, and most recently my miscarriage after rainbow baby. And this one I'm going to talk about my most recent miscarriage. So I want to add in a trigger warning here, so talking about miscarriage and the very raw emotions still. And the treatment I received from the early pregnancy unit. So I fell pregnant in a month that we weren't actually trying, and I tested 2 days before my period was due because we were going to go to a spa on the day my period was coming. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to do anything wrong. So when it came up with a faint positive on an expired test, I was amazed. Oh, this is great, this is fantastic. So I repeated the test on the day that my period should come to make it the most accurate, and it was still positive, but it wasn't quite as dark as I imagined it would be. So every day the pregnancy develops, the HCG hormone that is produced by the fetus should double. No, every other day, should I say. It should double. And so the pregnancy test not being as dark as I anticipated kind of had me worried. So I repeated it again 2 days later, and while it was darker, it wasn't dark as I'd like it to be. And I started getting paranoid because I thought, well, what if it's an ectopic again? So I'd asked my GP to do a pregnancy blood test, and I'd worked out what my hormone level should have been at the point that they did the test. So it should have been round about 300 or more for it to be positive, 300 or less for it to not be quite as clear cut. And so that was supposed to offer me that relief of at least I knew, at least I could then get cracking with the next bit. So when the test came back at a level of 542, it just blew me away. I was so pleased, and it kind of just wiped away those concerns of ectopic, because it was more than what I was expecting. So I booked in with the early pregnancy unit for a reassurance scan. That was unfortunately a difficult experience to try and do. So when I spoke to the ward, I got passed from the receptionist to a support worker to a sister, because I was trying to self-refer. And I said to them, when I had an ectopic, the consultant that looked after me had said that any subsequent pregnancies that I should have an early scan. And the sister I spoke to said, no, you can't do this. I said, well, I was told I've had miscarriage as well. And she said, we don't do early scans for reassurance. So then I said about the NICE guidance. So NICE guidance allows ladies to self-refer if they've had a molar, an ectopic pregnancy, or recurrent miscarriage. And I fit 2 of those criteria. So after she put me on hold for a bit, and obviously I had a chat with someone else, it then booked me in for that early pregnancy scan. So at the early pregnancy scan, I should have been round about 6 weeks. So I was hoping to at least see a pregnancy sac with a yolk sac, and if possible, a fetal pulse or a baby. Maybe a heartbeat if I was lucky, because they can start round about 5 weeks and 5 days gestation. I was sat waiting with my husband and just feeling so anxious and excited, and that sort of butterflies in your tummy sensation. And I was joking to him, could you imagine if this is not an ongoing pregnancy? Well, that'll be kind of like that shows you what you know, EPAU. So we got in the scan room, knew it was going to be an internal scan, and the sonographer was quiet for a bit, as I was expecting them to be, so they could gather all the information that they needed to. And he said to me, so Laura, I'm sorry to say that for today I can see a gestation sac, but no contents within it. So I asked if I could see the scan, because of my experience as a fertility nurse, having undergone ultrasound training. I knew what I'd need to see, what I was looking at. And I knew the protocol was then to either have a repeat scan or blood tests. So they asked if I could have a blood test done on that day and then to have it repeated 48 hours to give it that doubling chance. Oh, when I went back in on that Friday, the nurse called me back with the results later that day. And I don't think she realised the information she was giving me. So she told me my result of the 2 days prior, the Wednesday, and she said it was about 1,400. So the repeat test only came back at 1,700. Don't think she realised at that point that she was actually telling me officially that it wasn't an ongoing pregnancy. There wasn't any sort of, I'm sorry for your loss, this is a really difficult time, we're here to help you. It was kind of a very focused on the result and then the next bit of the plan, which sadly was to repeat the blood in 48 hours again. Because at this point they start wondering whether or not it is a ectopic pregnancy. Because in ectopic pregnancy, the hormone level does rise, but it doesn't rise quickly because it's not in the right place. So they repeated it again, and that level came back at 1,900. So once again, it had gone up, but not by enough. So they said they wanted to do a repeat scan and blood test 48 hours later again. At the scan, it was someone that had trained me. So they knew about my history, they knew about my background, and were far more comfortable giving me all the information that I wanted. The pregnancy sac was still there, but it had barely grown. She said it could even appear to have shrunk. And I kind of felt like at this point I wished that it could have just ended and stopped there. They were worrying about ectopic, but I was just focusing on getting it over with, moving on as quick as I could. Now they said you can either have it repeated in 48 hours or repeat it in a week. And you know what to look out for, so you know heavy bleeding, cramping, worse than a period. I said, yeah, and I'd rather go for that week repeat, please. I don't want to come back any sooner. So a week later, and that hormone level still hadn't gone down by enough. It had dropped by 17%. So it had gone from 1,900 down to 1,700 or 1,600. So it meant then my body wasn't recognising it was an ongoing pregnancy. I had started to bleed the day before that scan. So I think the hope was that my body would start to flush it away, but that didn't happen. And at the point of the repeat test, so that 1 week later test, the bleeding had even started to slow down a bit. It was still red, it was still there, but it was not enough. So once again, I was going back in 48 hours later, getting that blood test repeated, and it was going down, but still by not enough. And the consultant that I spoke to happened to be a consultant that I work with, so she was very flexible with what she offered. And given at this point the natural approach hadn't seemed to result in my body passing the pregnancy tissue, she offered me a medical management, which is to have the mifepristone medication to help soften the womb lining, and then the misoprostol 48 hours later to help stimulate contractions. So I had the mifepristone on the Sunday and was booked to go back in on the following Tuesday. I had a little bit of loss by this point, so it had started going really brown. I thought I might have passed something in the toilet, but couldn't be sure. I mean, short of fishing it out of the bowl, which I really didn't fancy doing, there was no way to say. And because it was no bigger than a 5p piece, I didn't know. So on the day of the misoprostol, because I'd told them that I could have potentially passed the tissue, they offered me another scan, my 4th scan in this miscarriage. And they could see that at the fundus, so the top part of the uterus, it was thin. The lower half of the cavity did have a thickened wound lining, but it looked very irregular. It kind of looked like there was still a bit of bleeding to come. But because they couldn't see a pregnancy sac, they didn't want to have to give me the misoprostol. And to be fair, knowing what misoprostol can do, I didn't want it either unnecessarily. So they let me go home and just kind of let things sort themselves out. But it wasn't actually until 10 days later, when I'd been kind of having spotting and brown loss on and off, that I started to bleed heavy again. And then on that 10th day after what should have been having the misoprostol, that's when the pregnancy tissue came out. And there was a little bit of relief with it, a sense of, right, it's done. I can go back to some sense of normality. I had at this point taken some time off work because I was trying to just keep going, and because it just got so much, the blood tests, the scans, the more blood tests, the more blood tests, the scans, the more blood tests, I needed to have a break from that and a break from my work as working with ladies undergoing fertility, working with ladies that are going to be potentially pregnant. I just couldn't feel that I could support them and then support myself at the same time. So this whole miscarriage just really felt drawn out. It wasn't painful in any way. It just felt like it was drawing my emotions out of me, drawing my resilience, drawing my patience, and making the process just one long episode. When I'd taken the time out, I started seeing a psychologist that was linked to the EPAU about the pregnancy loss. And because I was working while going through all these scans and blood tests, I'd just been parking my feelings, putting them at the side, waiting until I had an answer before I dealt with them. But it got to a point that I realised they'd just been pushed down so much that they were a scramble. They were like a ball of yarn had mixed with another ball of yarn, and they were all shouting at me to be heard and being very incoherent. I couldn't even have labelled them to be able to say, well, that's sadness, that's anger. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair. I wanted to cry, but I was so scared that if I did this, I wouldn't know where to stop. And above all else, I worried that I wouldn't be able to care for my son if I stopped and let myself go through these emotions. I was so relieved to actually have the time off work, because that meant then that what I was working with, the energies that I had, weren't being put into work, it were being put into my son. And when he was in nursery, it actually meant I had something to put into me. I described to the psychologist working at 20% of my usual capacity, and that 19% of that went to my son. So it very much felt that 1% was just not getting any attention when it should have done. I'd been seeing the psychologist weekly from that point onwards, and it was really beneficial to have someone that was just solely focused on talking to me about my emotions, about validating my experience, validating my emotions, telling me that it was okay to feel the way I did. She asked me why I didn't feel like I could cry, and I told her that I was worried that if I let go, I might not stop. And in one session, it just felt like I couldn't talk because there was this lump in my throat. And I stood up and said to her, can I have a hug, please? And when I was stood and she was cuddling me, that was when I first really start letting it go. I don't know how long I was stood in that embrace with her, but she was saying lovely words like, you're safe, you can let it go, you're not holding your strength back for anybody now, you can be weak in this moment. And it just felt so cathartic to let it go. I even continued to cry after our session finished, all on my drive home. It still felt so good to cry about it. If I could go back and do anything differently, it would be to allow myself to recognise that it's not easy going through a miscarriage, and to give myself the time. I don't think that this would have been so hard if I'd actually dealt with the miscarriage that I'd had early this year in January, or the ectopic that I had in 2022, or the miscarriage that I had in 2021. I'd pushed them all to the side, focusing on the next thing, focusing on trying to get pregnant, not realising that there was a boulder behind me, getting ready to squish me the moment I tripped up. I have found through this, the psychologist, to be invaluable. But there's also other outlets. There is the Miscarriage Association, the Tommy's website. They're both useful resources that look into the causes of miscarriage, the information around miscarriage, and the support available. There is the Worst Girl Gang Ever that do a podcast. They have resources on the website, and they have a pregnancy loss survival guide, which I have used and felt so seen by and validated by. Please feel free to message me or put a comment down below. I would love to hear your thoughts and talk to you about anything, any questions you may have. Take care of yourselves.